Eight Passengers was once a popular family vlogging channel, but I described in the previous episode how the Frankes were referred to Jodi Hildebrandt. And this would be the beginning of a nightmare for the family. So from the beginning, Shari is concerned about Jodi on a level that the others just don't seem to be. She looks into Jodi a little bit, and the things she finds scare her, as they should. Shari finds out that Jodi's license had been suspended. Her kids don't even speak to her. And she's like, why are we working with this woman? And Ruby basically responds by being like, well, anyone who is against Jodi can't handle truth. At first, it seems like Ruby doesn't totally reveal to the viewers online how deeply involved she is with Jodi. Behind the scenes, she is following every single thing that Jodi is telling her. So Jodi essentially has like total control over the Franke children because Ruby and Kevin will threaten the Franke children with anything that Jodi tells them to. Jodi decides that Chad's progress is not cutting it, so she has them pull him out of sports. Now, it sounds like at this point, he had been hopeful to get an athletic scholarship for college. And basically, in pulling him out of those sports, I believe the sports were track and football, she was ripping away any chance at that. Because even if they say, oh, if you make more progress on your personal development, whatever that means, then we'll let you go back into sports. By that point, you can't just take time off from a sport in high school and be aiming for that. Like taking even one season off of a sport has like significant effects on any chance of that happening. I was always awful at sports, but from what I know though, you definitely can't just take time off like this. And my take is that it really has nothing to do with being responsible and everything to do with Jodi punishing him for not falling into line. You also see in the book how her language becomes even more manipulative towards Shari and Chad and her other children. For example, they do the same thing with Shari that they did with Chad, pulling her out of sports. And when asked why, Ruby tells Shari that she's not being emotionally vulnerable enough. Then she goes on to say, imagine how that'll affect your husband in the future. You think any man wants to put up with that? A cold, shutdown wife? It's funny because she has this tendency throughout the book to try to like force Shari to act in the way that she wants her to by invoking this fear of not being marriageable. So then they say they are giving her the gift of sessions with Jodi, which is one of the manipulative ways they will phrase things. And this is a theme throughout. They'll say they're giving them the gift of blank, and it's something they're being told to do. But it's like framed in this way of like, this is a gift to you. And this is a great example of how it's like, it's not a choice. It's not even a choice. It's certainly not a gift, and it's not even a choice. They immediately follow it up with saying if she doesn't agree to the sessions with Jodi, they're going to take away her car, her phone, and pull her out of school entirely. Keep in mind, at this point, she's in high school. So as a part of this lovely gift, Shari is now required by Jodi to write down all the times she engages in what Jodi calls distorted thinking. This especially struck me as kind of wild because in the early part of the book, I haven't gone into this as much just because there's so much in the book, but Shari talks about struggling with constantly obsessing over any fault to the point that even she's talking to like her bishop about, I think she's like really compulsively thinking about a kiss she had with a boy, and was that bad? Is she like a bad sinner for that? Blah, blah, blah. And even the bishop's like, you got to relax. Like, I feel like when like the church people are going like, you got to chill, like, and that's no shade on religion. Okay. I grew up very religious. Like that is not shade or anything, but I will say like, I would say the same about if I went to a priest and they told me that, that's how I would know I really do need to chill out a little. And again, this is neither shade towards the church and it's not shade towards Shari either, because it's not her fault. It's just, it goes to show that she's having extreme anxiety in those cases. And being forced to compulsively record every time you have a quote unquote distorted thought seems like the kind of thing that would only worsen that kind of like compulsive behavior. Like it just fuels that kind of way of thinking. But even worse, Jodi doesn't see it that way at all. She says, people either struggle with denigration or self-adulation, and that Shari, which I don't know that that's true at all, but like that's a quote from Jodi. That's not a statement of fact. But then she tells Shari that she is more on the adulation side and that she thinks too highly of herself, and tells her to start correcting basically any confident or proud thought. Like if she feels confident about a test, to convince herself that she's going to fail it because she's, quote, a very stupid little girl. But the scariest thing, in my opinion at least, is how then she asks Shari how that feels to think. And Shari says, you know, I don't know, scared and exposed. And Jodi says, that's good. You're vulnerable. And this is what it looks like when Shari realizes she isn't right about everything. And in that moment, I was like, oh, that tells us everything about this interaction. Because this feels engineered to make her doubt her own instincts and her own judgments. While Shari gets out much quicker than the other Franke children, you do still see in her book, like you see these themes and these threads of the manipulative ways that Jodi is basically like weaponizing psychology and her role as a mental health practitioner and really abusing it. And it is a little eerie. There's also other things to unpack that I don't think I'll go into too much here because, again, I don't want to get too off track, but let me know if you're interested in hearing more ways that Connections kind of follows the patterns of other high control groups. Despite her misgivings about Jodi, very rational ones, she describes herself as also drinking the Connections Kool-Aid, at least for a while. So she talks about how during this time, she was trying her best to live by the Connections rules. And she describes it as being almost addicted to my weekly self-flagellation sessions with Jodi, where she lists out the number of times she had this distorted thinking, like Jodi told her to do. Now, Jodi kind of snaps at her and tells her that she's an obedient little drone and she's not getting it. And it's not just about tallying thoughts. And Shari basically is just confused, which I would be too. I'd be like, then what do you want me to do? Because she literally told her to tally her thoughts. She journals right after their session. And this is where Jodi made a huge mistake, because Shari writes down in her journal, Jodi thinks I am relying too much on external validation. She said I was an obedient little drone focused on getting approval from her and Ruby. Next session, she brings this up with Jodi and she references it. Actually, the interesting thing is when she references it, she's actually not disagreeing with Jodi. She's saying, oh, I thought about it and now I think I understand what you were saying when you said I was like an obedient little drone. And Jodi is like, I didn't say that to you. I would never say that. And the thing that she doesn't realize is because Shari wrote it down and knows that there was no time in between the session ending and her writing it, there was no time for her to forget it or misremember it, basically. And so she knows that that got said. It like really clicks for her, like, no, this person is being manipulative. And so that really makes it easier for Shari to, I think, distance herself from Connections when she goes off to college and leaves Jodi at home. Because that's right, Jodi lives with them now. So that's very normal and healthy for a mental health professional. Disclaimer, this is neither normal nor healthy. Please don't move in with your therapist. In addition, around this time, the internet had found out from one of their YouTube videos that in response to a prank, Chad had, the parents took away his bed for 7 months. People were like, what the ever-loving fuck? And rightly so, because that's really bad. That's really messed up. There were a number of deeply concerning posts, but I think that was the one that kicked off the like mass outcry against the channel and people being like, this is flat out abusive. Like, this is really messed up. And there was a drastic drop off in their YouTube viewers. Some of the other especially horrifying moments that I feel like are worth mentioning as well. But these were also very, very concerning. So I'm going to mention them, which is that there was an incident where Ruby threatens to cut the head off of a stuffed animal of what appears to be the youngest daughter. But I'm guessing it's the youngest daughter. So she was very young at the time. So Ruby forced her daughter, I think she was in kindergarten at the time, to make her own lunches. And when she forgot, she refused to bring food and says that because the teacher called her, basically saying that she was very uncomfortable with a child not having lunch to eat. Can you bring her something? And Ruby basically refused to. And she was saying in the video, oh, I really hope no one gives her something to eat because like she needs to be hungry. That's the consequence, blah, blah, blah. Okay, now let's jump to Christmas of 2021. Ruby and Jodi for this Christmas actually announced to all of the kids that the two youngest won't be getting any presents. I was very happy to see that Shari's first response is to say, well, then the rest of us shouldn't get presents either because like it doesn't feel right. And it's sad because also I feel like this is a way of putting almost a wedge between the two youngest and the others. Like it makes everyone complicit in this. And so the two youngest have to sit there, and I think they even make them like clean up all of the like wrapping paper afterwards too. It's like really weird. And then let me not forget, because they also say that the two youngest siblings have to ask permission before speaking to any of the other family members. So at the time, the two youngest were 10 and 8. So that really also puts it into perspective, I think, in terms of like the thing like they have to ask permission before speaking. I'm assuming maybe this is like they were interrupting too much or something, but like I feel like that's pretty common for young kids. With this whole thing of not giving the two youngest siblings presents for this Christmas, I really think it speaks to how Ruby and Jodi have this pattern of finding ways to make the other siblings complicit in that. But around the same time, Kevin and Chad are, quote unquote, invited to leave the home. And this is explained as them both being selfish. With regard to Chad, he actually reveals that he had occasionally viewed explicit materials and had also occasionally made out with girls. That's basically it. Very normal stuff for a teen boy. I think he was 17 at this point. So Jodi, when she came to move in with them, was experiencing supposedly demonic possessions. I think there's a potential argument for her maybe having faked these in order to manipulate into moving in, getting closer to the family, and having more of an opportunity to isolate the family members that she wanted to. But when Ruby finds out, she says, oh, this must be why Jodi's experiencing these, and everything we've done to try to fix and help hasn't worked. And she kicks him out of the house. As far as the rent and all of his other expenses, he was having to pay for them with multiple jobs he was working. He was having to pay for his sessions with Jodi out of pocket. And he was expected to continue those sessions. I'm sure that was a condition of all of this. And it was like $900 a month, I think they said, for his sessions with Jodi, which was like several times his rent, I believe. So that's pretty wild, honestly. Yeah, I don't even know what to say about that because it just is just wild to me. Well, during this time, Shari does try to talk to Chad. At this point, she is very much out of the spell of Jodi. And she, having had time with her therapist where the therapist has pointed out the abusiveness of Ruby's behavior, Shari tries to say this to Chad because he doesn't seem to want to have contact with her. Because one of the conditions of Chad and Kevin leaving, one of the things they had to do was they couldn't have contact with any family members, including Shari. And she was very frustrated by this. She was trying to get in contact with them to talk to them. So when she goes to talk to Chad, she says this. He really isn't willing to hear it. But also, he apparently tells Ruby, I'm sure because he was still kind of under the influence of Ruby and Jodi at this point. So after Shari goes to see Chad, she receives a text from Ruby. and I'm going to read it in full. Shari, you have been deceiving me for quite some time. This makes sense now why you didn't want to talk to me. You couldn't handle the duplicity. It's clear to me that you are not interested in being part of our family, and you have chosen to disconnect by sneaking around, attempting to harm other members of our family. I feel great grief and loss at your choices. I will honor your agency of disconnect. Disconnection means you are not interested in being around me and the family. You don't get to disconnect emotionally and tell stories about your mother and then get the perks of familial and financial connection that I provide. It has come to my attention that you called me abusive. Wow, Shari, that word is heavily loaded with intimation. It is hurtful that you would use that word knowing the pain that this lie has caused. This is my way of being very loving and inviting you to see the reality you are in. You don't get to use me or any members of my family. When you are willing to humble yourself and acknowledge your aggression and deception, I am open to talking to you. I will keep you in my prayers. You appear to be a very lost soul. You don't even know where the enemy is. Your arrogance has kept you from heeding my warnings. Love, Ruby. After Shari receives that text, she knows that things are probably about to get bad. And she starts thinking about all the things that Ruby might do to punish her, because she knows that's how Ruby operates. By now, she understands that she can't hope for anything better than that. And so she empties out her checking account and moves it to a new account because Ruby has access to that checking account. And she realizes that since Ruby has access to it, she could just dump all the money out of it. And so she moves all that money. And sure enough, the next morning after she transfers that money, she gets an email from the family insurance agent, not even from Ruby, but from their insurance agent, that Ruby has taken her off of the car insurance. So now she's going to need to get new car insurance. Shari then realizes, though, that there's another problem. She needs the title to her car. Otherwise, Ruby could just report it stolen. Shari's worried about how Ruby's going to respond when she asks for the title. So to try to protect herself, she loops in their congregation president, thinking that Ruby won't really want to act badly when that person is on the message with them. I think it's a pretty understandable thing and just shows how much anxiety there probably is for Shari at this time. Her response comes. Shari, this is just another example of your lying and manipulating, bringing President Jim Nelson into this text thread. That's the president of their congregation. You are just asking for the title for your car, which I have no problem getting to you. You could have just asked me. You've been very active in deceiving and creating chaos, pain, destruction, and turmoil. My own daughter has turned on truth and me, capital T, truth. And the outcomes are devastating to your siblings. Shari, I am your mother. I am only guilty of teaching you truth. Truth is the only thing that matters in this life, and you have fought against it since you were little. It breaks my heart you are at war with God. Is she God now? Anyway, it breaks my heart that you are at war with God. The Lord has blessed you with a quick mind, and it is devastating to watch you use that mind to fight against truth. I will give the title to Pam. Feel free to collect it from her. So Shari arranges to get the title from Pam. It's worth noting a couple of things are happening in the meantime. One of them being that she, around this time, learns that the children were left alone for 5 days. This is really concerning to her, obviously. And so she reaches out to DCFS. And this is when Ruby basically seems to have discovered that she was the one that reached out to DCFS. She's afraid that because Pam seems to have been involved in connections and was very closely involved with Jodi as well. So I think Shari is really worried that Pam might just refuse to give her the title. And so she's feeling anxious about this. She ends up texting Pam, hoping that she can get Pam to agree to just put the documents in her mailbox, meaning Pam's mailbox, and let Shari come pick them up. Pam responds to this text by saying, absolutely not, Shari. These are valuable legal documents, and I won't risk them being stolen or lost. You'll need to come to the house and collect them in person. See you at the appointed time and day, Pam. So there's basically no way around it, and we're going to see why that is in just a moment. Shari brings with her to the meeting Mrs. Haymond, which is the woman who she will later start calling mom. This is the family that kind of took her in during this time. So Mrs. Haymond is brought for moral support. Pam's door opens and it's Pam and Ruby. They actually try to get Shari to come inside, but she wisely does not agree to that. I think that's a very good idea, and also a very good idea to have brought Mrs. Haymond. Ruby greets her. Shari basically just asks for her papers. Ruby says, "Not so fast. I'm not giving you the title until you listen to what I have to say. Come inside. Let's have a little chat." "No, I'm not coming inside. If you want to talk, we can do it here." So she describes it as kind of like a bizarre standoff. And Ruby says, "I can't believe you called the police on me. After everything I've done for you, after all the sacrifices I've made, how could you betray me like that, Shari? How could you be so selfish?" Shari says, "Selfish? I was worried about the kids. They were alone for 5 days, Mom. They're fine. They're old enough to take care of themselves. This is about you, Shari. Your jealousy, your need for attention. This isn't about me. It's about the safety of my siblings. It's about doing what's right." Ruby does not like that. What's right? You have no idea what's right. You're just a child playing at being an adult. Your siblings are terrified of you now for calling the police on them. She didn't call the police on them. She called the police on you, Ruby, but whatever. Ruby's face hardened, her lips twisting into a sneer. "One day, Shari, you'll come crawling back to me, begging for my forgiveness. And it'll be hard for me to give it to you, but I'll be gracious." "Forgiveness for what, Mom? You're telling lies about me everywhere, and they're spreading like dandelion seeds across the field. The weeds are all going to pop up, and one day you'll have to go back and cut them all down and come apologize to me." "I'm not going to apologize for telling the truth." "How dare you contact Chad and Kevin behind my back? They're my family too. You don't get to dictate who I can and can't talk to." "Family? Please. You've made it abundantly clear that you want nothing to do with this family. You're a traitor, Shari, a Judas in our midst. You've always hated me. Ever since you were 5 years old, I could see it in your eyes. The way you looked at me, the way you judged me. You've never appreciated anything I've done for you, all the sacrifices I've made." "That's not true. I've never hated you, Mom. I was just scared of you." "You're like the Romans in the Bible. Feeding me vinegar when I'm dying of thirst, crucifying me for your own selfish gains." From Mrs. Haymond in the back, she goes, "Oh, for goodness sake." And I have to say, I feel like most of us reading this are going to concur with Mrs. Haymond because, oh, for goodness sake, indeed. I really wanted to read that whole section out because I think it gives such a sense of everything that Shari and her siblings have been dealing with this whole time. Because while, yes, this is probably aggravated by Jodi, I also think a huge piece of this is also the fact that this is who Ruby is. She does see her children as these like enemies. And if they don't fall perfectly into line, they're against her. And it's a very bizarre way for a mother to look at her children, honestly. So this is all happening September 2022. A lot of the next year is described as being pretty, it seems like it was kind of a pattern of Shari was very concerned for her siblings. She was sometimes hearing things from the neighbors who would call her and let her know what they knew. I think they were also really concerned. She does hear from a neighbor that the children have been pulled out of school. She finds out that Ruby gave away their dog, which I really felt for Shari in that, because I feel like even though like that's not the biggest thing that's going on in this moment. I'm sure she's even more concerned for her siblings, but I think it's just like one more hurt that's hard to deal with. It seems like the neighbor basically had the impression that the reason she gave away the dog is probably so that she doesn't have to let the children outside even to walk the dog. There is a passage I want to highlight where Shari talks about watching the documentary Sins of Our Mother. If you're not familiar with this documentary, it is In Shari's words, it was about an LDS couple, Lori Vallow and Chad Daybell. They had gotten married super fast after both their spouses died under sketchy circumstances. Chad's former wife, Tammy Daybell, died in October 2019 under suspicious circumstances, and Lori's former husband, Charles Vallow, was shot and killed by Lori's brother in July 2019. In September 2019, Lori's two children, Tylee Ryan, 16, and Joshua J.J. Vallow, 7, were reported missing. Lori and Chad married in November 2019, just weeks after Tammy Daybell's death and while their kids were still missing. The couple were immersed in the same extreme religious beliefs and doomsday preparations as Jodi and Ruby, and the way this family spiraled into darkness felt horribly familiar. Their intense belief in the second coming and their obsession with Tom Harrison's visions of glory prophecies. It was all the same stuff Ruby and Jodi were always going on about. But it wasn't until watching that documentary that my hope faded into the darkest thoughts I'd had yet. Ruby and Jodi were just as unhinged as Chad and Lori, if not worse. If we don't do something soon, my siblings are going to die. I think it's also worth noting that I believe from what I remember of that documentary, it is largely told from the perspective of the older brother of those children that died. So I think probably Shari identified with that feeling a lot and was probably thinking, I want to, probably really becoming desperate to do something, because what if one day she's the one calling her mom saying, where are my siblings? Where are they? There's clips from what I remember of that documentary, there was a point where the brother was having to figure out what happened to his siblings because they were just missing. And I can really see how this would resonate with Shari. And I just thought this was a really interesting passage where we see Shari's mindset during this time and probably just how fearful she must have been. Because I think a lot of us had some sense that something bad is going on with this family. I think there were a lot of people watching the videos from 8 Passengers thinking that. But there's a difference between that and Shari truly thinking, oh my God, my siblings are going to die if I don't do something, because this is not going to end well. August 30th, 2023, Shari gets a call that there are police outside her family home. She goes there and watches them break the door down looking for any children. At this point, we know now that what had happened was her second youngest sibling had escaped and sought help. Now, as far as the custody of the remaining minor children, Shari doesn't give a lot of details around it, but I think that's for the best. It sounds like the family is back together, but overall, I think she's still trying to allow for the privacy of her siblings, and ultimately that's more their story than it is hers. If they want to someday tell the story of reuniting with their father or not reuniting with their father, whatever the case may be, that will be their story to tell or not tell as they see fit. I do think one thing I want to address is I've seen a lot of commentary about how he shouldn't be reunited with his kids because he is also responsible and shouldn't get a pass. And I don't disagree with that last part, but here's my thought. I don't think reunification is always about what the parent deserves, but rather about what that child needs and what's going to be best for them. I think that ultimately I am hopeful and wanting to trust in the family court that would have had to make a decision on this. To my knowledge, those records are sealed. And again, I think that's for the best. I think there's been enough breaching of the 4 minor children's privacy with all of this. And ultimately, I think it's, something that I hope that between the experience of DCFS workers and also any input from the children themselves or even Shari and Chad, I would hope that they have hopefully come to the right decision on that. One thing I will say is I can understand the feeling of not wanting Kevin to get off without accountability, but for what it's worth, I actually think that he will be facing accountability whether or not there are legal or custody ramifications, because I think the biggest accountability for Kevin is going to come in seeing the damage he did to the relationships with all 6 of his children. I think that there is going to be, if there is a path forward for them, it's going to be a long one. It's going to be a difficult one. And I think if he's truly remorseful, he will understand that and accept that there are consequences to what he did. And probably a lot of those relationships are never going to be the same. Shari, even in this book, calls him Kevin, even in the acknowledgments. She thanks mom and dad, but she's talking about the Haymans. She still refers to them as mom and dad. Maybe someday Kevin will earn the name of dad again, but I think it would be great if she also continues to have that found family in her life. Ultimately, that will be Shari's decision. But again, I think that's something where if Kevin is truly remorseful, he will have to be understanding of that. I can understand why a lot of people feel like that's not nearly enough consequences. Shari seems to end her book with a lot of hope. She talks about finally having a family dinner all together. This is really the only thing I'm referring to when it seems like they may have, been reunited, is the way she phrases that. I'm kind of taking it as likely being after reunification and they're able to all be together, but she seems to leave it somewhat vague. But regardless, she talks about finally having a family dinner and being nervous because it's been so long, but hearing the laughter and realizing that they are all together and that is what matters. She talks about her healing and how she is determined to break the cycle of abuse. She doesn't want to continue it with any children she chooses to have. And she's recently become engaged. It seems like she's going to be living a very private life from now on with her husband-to-be and any children they have, if they do choose to have children. If we never hear anything more about Shari Franke, I think it will be because she is happy and has chosen to live a more private life. And that's a choice that was denied to her when she was young. So I think it's worth celebrating that she gets to choose that now and at least can have finally some agency over her own story. And also some agency in that she got to share the story in her own words in this book. And so I really do encourage everyone to go buy a copy if you can, because I really think it is really well done. I'm going to be doing at least one more follow-up episode to this that will deal with the abuse suffered by the youngest children in the Franke family, as well as other victims of Jodi Hildebrandt and what we know about their cases. If there's anything in particular you're interested to hear about this case or any other cases you'd like me to cover, please do let me know. Leave a comment, like, subscribe. I'd love to hear from you if you watch this. If you enjoyed this video, please let me know, and I will see you all next time. Stay safe.